Well, this is a little different setup only because we are so excited to have our first guest. And I am just honored and privileged to welcome to the Boone Tea podcast, Mr. David Jackson. So, David, thank you for joining us.
It is great to be here. I've got my own Boone Tea right here.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
We do enjoy supporting our local coffee shops to downtown Boone. David, for those that don't know you or may be listening to this episode outside of Boone, give us a little origin story of how you got to Boone and where you are today.
Well, it all started with a boy and a dream. No. My origin story is about 30 years in the making, I guess. I came up here to school, grew up in Greensboro, came to school in the fall of '96. To attend Appalachian State, and I have yet to leave. I feel like it's just my freshman year over and over and over again. After I graduated, I worked on campus at App State for about 16 years, served a variety of roles inside the athletic department. One of those was to serve as the radio broadcaster for football, basketball, and baseball, but I had an athletic administrative role as well, and worked on a lot of things that were external. So marketing, tickets, radio, TV, media relations, special projects, all of those things came under my purview at some point in time during that career. So I had a lot of experience in the I guess outbound traffic, if you will, of promoting things that were involved with App State athletics specifically, but formed a lot of relationships in the town of Boone. So about 10 years ago, it'll be 10 years August 1st, made the move across King Street and went to work for the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce as the president and CEO in August of 2016. And like I say, I've enjoyed that position for about 10 years. And when you think back to all of the things that have happened here in the community in 10 years, it's a long list. A lot of good, a lot of challenges that we've overcome or are in the process of overcoming. But it's been a great run, from a professional standpoint. So, we've my wife and I met at school. We've raised two daughters here. One of them has flown the coop at least to college. The other one is getting ready to start at the high school. So we prioritize that. We knew that as my time at App State was ending, we wanted to stay here and experience everything in this community that people like us get a chance to sell to others every day. The value of what Boone brings, why people rush to get back here if they have been here before, and why people make this a priority place to live. So I can honestly say I've gotten to experience that, and I hope that this is home, for the rest of time.
That boomerang effect is very real, but I'm one of the people that made home here and have stayed for a while. How would you describe Boone to someone who's never been here?
I think to describe Boone to someone that never has been here requires a little bit of imagination, because I think that there are some people that just wouldn't believe what you tell them, that this is a place that you can truly step back in time. While we as local residents feel like we have the hustle and bustle of the big city, we don't. And some of what people from the outside enjoy about this is just the mountain pace, that things move a little bit slower. You can step out into nature very quickly. You can step away from the distractions of the world very quickly here. But also, because of our connectivity and the investments that have been made here, you can plug back in pretty quickly too. And we have seen that become exponentially important post-COVID. As people that have relocated here and want to have life here also need to stay connected to some of the other areas. So, to further that explanation, it can be utopia. I used to make the joke. We lived in a house out on the western side of the county off a dirt road, one of those kind of places, right? And I said, for 350 days a year, man, this place is unbelievable. The other 15 make you question your sanity every once in a while. But I think one of the great things about Boone from a resident's perspective, you have to want it. You want life here. And that means that there are some days that it snows sideways and it's 10 degrees and the wind's blowing 40 miles an hour and you love it. You are better for it. And then you get into the period of time like we're in right now in the summer. There is beauty everywhere. There is a distraction everywhere, and people. I think our pace in the summertime slows to help people enjoy that kind of thing. And I would describe Boone as a place that you can get a little bit of everything. You can be as connected as you need to be, but you can also step into the areas where your heart wants you to be, and that is to be a little slower, a little bit more deliberate, and enjoying a place that's got beauty that's unmatched anywhere else in the state.
Not a lot of people know this, but I grew up in England, and one of the things that drew me to Boone, even as a child, I was coming up here from Winston-Salem all the time, and just that small community village atmosphere was very reminiscent of England.
Yeah.
And so that's what I enjoy the most about Boone.
Yeah, I think describing this community as a place where neighbors truly know each other. I mean, it feels a little bit like a sitcom, but it's true. My wife and I just had 14 years of having children at Parkway Elementary School. There are people that you'll know forever because of that association, and there's an understanding of what it means to be in the Parkway family and the businesses that support that and the families that are there and the activities that they get a chance to experience. That is different. That is what's so, when you tell people this is my lived reality, they're like, what are you talking about? What place is this? Now, I think we also guard that, maybe sometimes more than we should. I think that there is something to be said for showing others how life can be. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean they all need to do it here. We don't have room for that. But I do enjoy seeing those places where Boone shows up. Mass General Store's influence and throughout their footprint. You see a little bit of Boone every time you walk into one of those stores. Right. You see a little bit of Boone, depending on how much of a outdoor furniture aficionado you are. You can see something made by Charleston Forge and know there's an influence there that comes from this community and what it's all about. And I've said this about App State. I feel the same about Boone. You can be walking through an airport, busiest airport in America. Mm-hmm. You can see two people walking toward each other with App State shirts on, and as they make eye contact, they instantly know everything about the other person. They know about what your values are, about what you are willing to endure, what you enjoy doing, and as you kind of do the nod as you walk past, there's a mutual respect and understanding that comes with that. That you are just from a special place, you're about that place, and you'll do anything for it. And I feel like that's App State and Boone all wrapped up into one.
And you might get a tailgate invitation.
You might. You might, and you'll
return.
Certainly have the numbers 34, 32 thrown at you in some way, shape, or form.
So, where were you on September 1st?
Yeah.
That's a good tie-in to what we're going to talk about next, which is App State's role in Boone. So both of our organizations, both the Boone Area Chamber of Commerce and my company, we use Placer AI data. And we had an episode a couple weeks ago talking about 4.4 million visits to App State's campus in the last 12-month period of time. We know that they are a major economic driver, a major employer to the region. How important is App State to Boone's economy?
Well, they are the single biggest influence on Boone's economy. App State either directly or indirectly supports the vast majority of things that go on here. And, and I say that how we quantify that at the Boone Area Chamber, App State is an employer. They're the largest in the community. They are a child care provider. They're one of the largest in the community. They are a think tank. You look at the DNA of many of the nonprofits or community outreach activities, there is some tie to App State involved in that. The business of App State makes downtown move. Roughly 4,000 employees that are in and around campus on a daily basis during the fall or spring. They are the ones that are eating in the restaurants and shopping in the shops and parking in the meters. That is a revenue stream. May not be the most direct revenue stream that's always wanted, but it is one. they make that area hum. Then we think about the innovation. We think about the number of businesses that have been started in this community by people that have come to App State and chosen to make life here. For every Stick Boy Bakery or Boonshine Brewing Company, or go on down the list. Those are people that have now chosen to make an economic impact of their own. And that's all been, App State is the catapult to all of that. They are a research institution now, one that is incredibly involved in some of the what happens after Helene. So they are a question answerer for us. In a number of ways, where they can put real quantitative analysis behind some of the things that we may think to be true, but if we're going to make positive strides as a community moving forward, whether that's a lean recovery or economic vitality, whatever, they can back it up. They also have branding influence. You might not know Boone or Watauga County, or not. You might not know how to pronounce Watauga or Appalachian for that matter, but you know where Boone is because of App State. And that's not just athletically. My first connection to App State was through my second grade teacher. She had an App State poster on one side of her little cubby that had all the supplies in it. There was an App State generic poster on one side. And then there was the picture of the two kids in the football helmet that said, "I can't wait to play at App State," on the other side. And then there were Black Saturday posters that would show up during football season. And, if you go to an event and say, raise your hand if you were educated by an App State grad teacher, hands go up all over the place. There is a tie to that, right? There is a selling of an experience that comes from who your teacher was. And I was very much involved in that. The first time we went skiing as a family, I came back and told my third grade teacher, hey, we just went to the mountains and went skiing. And she's like, I went to college there. And as a third grader, I'm like, there's a college there. Yeah. Now, was that the day that I decided to go to App State? Probably not. But I can tell you that every one of those teachers that I had an influence on that. And that is marketing, branding, awareness at its root level. Might not feel like that, but it is. And they connected, in my mind, at that formative time to what community meant. And then you come up here and experience that, and you see, oh, yeah. And what is the reason that got you here? Well, it's because of, snow skiing and my teacher's persistence in making sure that I wore black and gold on Fridays. And that stuff matters. So it's all of these things. Even out into the county, some of the ag initiatives, some of the important issues that impact each one of these little communities that make up Watauga County have a university influence to them. So we can't turn our blind eye to them. Does that mean that the relationship is always perfect? No, it's not. I think Chancellor Norris and her administration have taken major steps to repair some of those things, to rebuild the bridge at a time that we're actually rebuilding bridges. But I think the university also sees its role as not just transactional. Sometimes it's one of, how can we just show up to help? Maybe that's connecting other resources. Maybe that's just bringing a little bit of attention to something. And those are the elements that when you look at our community against other rural communities, it's a major positive that we have here that not every community is fortunate enough to have on their side.
One of the things that David mentioned that has really made an impact for me personally on seeing App State outside of just athletics or an employer is really that word resources. So my oldest, Peter, has some pretty severe developmental delays, and the resources that campus had for him through the speech language pathology program, the center that they have up at University Hall, their willingness to get ingrained into the community, the students who come to not only learn, but to practice and pour into local community. Like when you're beginning of the school year, you see all the student athletes at respective schools. That is the kind of stuff that really showed me why App State is important to this community.
You bring up a really interesting point in that too, in that I've always thought one of the advantages that Boone has to support App State is the scalability. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily scaling in terms of business growth. What I mean is that a student can have that kind of hands-on experience. They can work with Peter and get real hands-on experience is going to make them a better professional. But it's not like we're so large a community that those individual one-on-one circumstances feel distant. We need them. We need those influences wherever they happen to be. We need them to make our community function. But with that, there's a great two-way relationship there. We get support services that you would not expect to find in rural North Carolina. But those folks that are doing that job get unmatched opportunity. As young as undergrads, certainly as they get into graduate programs and beyond that, it gets even more skilled. But then what I was saying earlier about you take a little bit of Boone with you out, you're talking about an area that is going to be incredibly important moving forward to training rural healthcare practitioners, whether that's on the mental health side, your traditional healthcare jobs, or anything else that comes up in the next 10 years. This is a place where you can get a truly scalable learning lab to how those things will exist in a rural community. And we get a chance to benefit from that while they're learning those skills and honing that craft.
So App State as an institution has been growing like wildfire over the last 2+ decades, right? I remember an institution that was in the low teens in terms of student population, now pressing up on 20,000 plus, depending on how you look at it between the two campuses. How do you feel like that growth has changed local business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first, I think that it's important to say that everything is relative, and also to work in some absolutes. So we know that you're right, that student attendance number pushes past 20,000, actually well past it now. You're getting into the 21, 22 range. It's important to note that there are 18,000 people here in Watauga County. That number has stayed relatively flat for the last several years, and it will likely be that way this year as well. Campus, since Chancellor Norris has been in place, and really maybe even a year before that, has prioritized a small growth percentage here. And while you'd never want to say the words no growth, incremental, very, very minor growth to the overall student number. We know that through demographic trends that are coming forward, that number is probably going to start to slide backward across the country. This isn't about App State. This is about higher education in general, right? So I think that the campus has taken the opportunity to reinvest into the resources they know they'll need in the future, not thinking about the 5,000 students they want to recruit next time around. I think you've seen a shift in that regard. Now, what you said about, back when we were in school, in the late 90s, early 2000s, yeah, this was a different campus. And you know what? It was a different campus 20 years before that, and it was a different campus 20 years before that. And when this thing started, it was started in a house. All right. I think we can all agree that it's better that App State is no longer in the house, that they have expanded outward. What I think we can also agree is that not all points in time in the university's growth has that growth been communicated in a way that was in a symbiotic pathway with the town. And that is what we feel as friction today. You can't do anything about past relationships today. You can only move forward and rebuild that trust. And I do like where the administration is going in that regard. But I think it's also very obvious to see that there in that period of time from, say, 2007 through about 2014, that there was a lot of moving and shaking on the campus side of that did not necessarily match the town's ability to keep up with that. And that, I think, if you hover over Howard Knob at 20,000 feet, you look down and you see this could have been done a little bit better. I think that gets back to the value of relationships. And while not every meeting is going to get everybody singing Kumbaya around the table, what they will do is get people talking off the same sheet of music and understanding shared goals, understanding pressures too. What doesn't get said, I don't think, enough is the amount of pressure the General Assembly put on Appalachian State to grow and grow quickly. There was no force that can push up against state government in that regard. what does that mean? Well, maybe it means that we need to have a conversation about the role of how state government is populating and positioning its university system of higher education. And I would love to go back and have that conversation 10 years in reverse, but we cannot. All we can do is think about moving forward. So, when you look at growth down the road, it's going to get incredibly more competitive to recruit students to any campus. When you look at the investments that App State is making, I think what they are telegraphing is we want to make sure that we've got the best of the tools, the resources, the innovation districts, the classroom buildings, the dormitories, to make sure that we remain marketable and competitive. You don't see a lot of brand new initiative as much as you see let's reinvest in what we're really good at. Right. And I think there's a role for App State, certainly within the region, if not the state. And there still can be some new attached to that, but it's got to be strategic, and that's where it's got to be brought along with the town and the county. And I know you're involved in some of this too. I think that we can agree that the relationships are better, yes. And the challenge is to keep them there. App State was a tremendous resource during Helene. It knocked down a lot of barriers. It brought some people back to the table. We got to keep them at the table. So the next time there is the university's going through a strategic plan process now, the county and the town are involved in that process. Will they agree on everything about that? Absolutely not. But are they there to see it all form and have some input on all three of those sides? Yes, they are, and it will be a better plan because of that.
What you were talking about with development and pressure is good lead into our next section. So we have talked a lot about just the development that's occurring within the county and the town of Boone. I don't think that we can ever satisfy everyone and everything. Mm-hmm. Are there needs in our community? Yes. Are they primarily revolved around housing? Yes. But, from your position, what types of development does Boone actually need more of?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, or maybe multi-million-dollar question.
$100 million.
$100 million question. Yeah,
Literally.
you keep throwing the zeros out there. This is your part of the show. I will say, I'm going to answer it differently than you will probably anticipate me answering it. And I'll say, we need development that is rooted in relationships. Mm-hmm. We need the development that people can understand that is necessary and not just one group's take on what they think we need. Mm-hmm. There needs to be coordination. I think that we could probably talk at length about the perceived lack of coordination in some of what has gone on here. Not everything, but some of what has gone on here. I think relationships are incredibly important in this conversation. And I think it is also plainly stated that relationship degradation is why we are in some of the boats we are in today. That said, we need development that respects the integrity of the community that people know and love, and why people want to be here in the first place, while also understanding that we need some modernization. And modernization doesn't mean that everything is like Art Deco and it looks like a New York City borough here. What I mean by that is that we have to supply the amenities that are going to draw people here. So the investment in broadband infrastructure, right. I realize that feels like, that's certainly not sexy. You're not going to drive podcast listens talking about broadband infrastructure, but man, how important is that? One of the single most important projects that we've got going on in this community right now is the giant hole outside the door that leads to this building. And the fact that multiple service providers are going to get a chance to put brand new conduit and whatever their mode of transportation is down there, they're going to be able to set all that stuff new. So there can be service expansion right. in an area that's going to be hot. We know that infrastructure and digging holes in Boone often leads you down weird roads, right? Choose your own adventure. You never know what you're going to find. So being able to kind of reset that, I think, is important to the overall development feel of this particular area of town. When you go and look at the next areas that are ripe for development, who is going to be involved in that conversation? Are we going to really redevelop the area around the hospital because of whatever happens to be the hot trend at the time, or are we going to actually think about what that district of the community needs and how we might be able to motivate those that are redeveloping property to do that in the spirit of what's needed? So that comes back to people being willing to sit around the table and letting petty family back and forth and the things that have driven us in the directions that we have been, let those things aside. The last thing I would say to that is incredibly important to all of this is the transportation infrastructure that supports it. And that, quite honestly, has been a ball that has been dropped by multiple parties. And I think they would all agree to that over time. That has as much to do with advocacy in Raleigh as it does digging in the ground in Boone. The state process is a little different these days than it was back in decades ago when, say, the Daniel Boone Parkway process was first discussed. What I think me coming at this, with only 10 years of time, says, why aren't we talking about alternatives to that? It's been pretty clear that particular project is going to cost a lot of money, doesn't have a lot of support, both governmentally or locally, yet we continue to have traffic congestion. So where is the alternative? Now there's a new process that's getting ready to start. Watauga County will be going through its next version of its comprehensive transportation plan, and this is the period of time where those alternatives can be brought forward. It's essential that we have the right people around the table that are going to leave all the baggage of yesteryear behind and come and talk about what is next and what is necessary for the community as we speak today.
I mean, I would just say two things in response to that. One is I think that the infrastructure component is very important. For example, old U.S. Highway 421 between Mac Brown and Food Line is going to be the fastest growing corridor over the next 5-year period of time because it is the last place where there is a water and sewer line. Put annexation aside, there is a piece of infrastructure that people need for development.
Right.
In terms of transportation, I think that, Apple Cart expansion can't just happen when a student housing project gets built. That we need Apple Cart. We really just need more people to understand how awesome of a resource it is and actually go use it.
Yeah, and also I'll take you a step further to understand how it's funded.
Yeah.
The university funds about 60% of the operation of Apple Cart. That's through student fees. They know that they're the top user group. Watauga County supplies a set amount. The town of Boone supplies a set amount. Those apartment complexes that you're talking about all have per user, per bed fees that they pay to Apple Cart to access their area. But Apple Cart is a fare free system. It has been, since the early 2000s. That comes at a cost, right? You don't have revenue generation in ways that necessarily like a city bus line would. But students rode free anyway for years. They pay for it through their fees, but they don't have a daily charge. We can't, and this is where I'll bring it back. I think an overarching theme of this entire conversation is leadership.
Yeah.
It takes leadership to know that you can't just throw an idea out and say, we're going to throw a park and ride out in East Boone and call it good, without saying how we're going to help subsidize that. Understanding that those buses are about $1.2 million a piece, and they don't just get delivered overnight. There's not a big yard of buses that comes. That's about an 18-month lead time. So who is communicating with 18 months vision to say we're going to have this complex out here and we're going to have another one over here? We know that these are going to be heavily student dominated. We don't want alt Apple Cart driving all over town and trying to drop people off in everybody's yard. So how do we alert, number one, our public transit system that this is going on? And they're surprisingly knowledgeable in all of this. But how do our governing bodies make sure that they're not promising things that they're also not paying for the delivery of? And that's where we will come back in from the chamber perspective and say that's a $1 million promise that you just made. Where is the funding coming for that? So we've got to be as mindful of the receipts as we are about the promise. And, Apple Cart has a member of the county commissioners, member of the town council on the board. Those folks, and we all, full disclosure, probably talk more about public transit than most people do. I'm on the board as well. And the Apple Cart administration does a good job of investigating new funding options, especially as it comes to grants and ways to fund things. Buses, number one. They also have a driver shortage. They are faced with everything that every business that has CDL licensed drivers is facing, that you can go get trained. And even though Apple Cart's paying like $19 an hour to drive buses, which is pretty good for the public transit sector, there's somebody that will give you that take that CDL license that you just got and give you 25 to go run long haul cabbage all over the place or whatever it happens to be. So you got to be competitive from that perspective as well, and make sure that we're sourcing the drivers to drive the routes, that have the buses to service the needs as we continue to expand out in the community. So I guess a long way to say is it's some of these, and I'm preaching to the choir here, it's not just as simple as saying, yes, we'll drop an Apple Cart over here. That again is about a $70,000 per route cost that goes into just functioning for one day when you factor in gas, staff time, bus maintenance, all that kind of stuff. So you got to be careful with where you do that, and make sure that you're servicing a load rather than one-offs. And that's a challenge.
I think it has a lot to do with timing, right? Mm-hmm. People don't understand. Most lay people in the community don't understand that when a route wants to get expanded, it has to get folded into existing timing.
Yeah, it does.
And it's not something that you can just say, oh, we'll take Apple Cart to somewhere in East Boone. And
and there are creative ways to do that. There are express routes. One of the things that we have talked about, and we talk about these in public meetings, so I'm not saying anything out of school here, but one of the things that we've talked about as thinking about servicing East Boone is creating an express route that would go express basically to Bamboo, and then trying to think about the stop alignment to make that worth it. There's obviously a huge development, student housing, at least one, if not more than one, potential for a park and ride. You've got a grocery store, you've got a collision center, you've got a gym, you've got a coffee shop, you've got enough things out there that you feel like you could make kind of an express East Boone route that could then dump back into the system somewhere. And that is there is a convenience piece to that, and it's funny, if you're in Chicago and you're riding the CTA, you know that sometimes you have to take the red line to a spot and then get on the blue line and go somewhere else. Yet you ask people to get off at the library and wait for another bus, or wait for another bus at the Peacock Circle. You think you brought all of the inconvenience in the world into their situation. That's how public transit works. You can't have a bus to go everywhere. And take someone from their front door to the place they need to go. That's not the purpose of the system. But the system is informed by other route structure, timing, traffic patterns. The bus does not have a magic bus lane that it works in, so it's got to factor into other traffic. And they try to keep the lead times about 15 minutes a route on the most populous routes. That is as good as traffic is allowing for. So it'd be great to get more people off the road and onto the buses. But I'll also tell you that Apple Cart is positioned this year to have about 1.6 million trips. That means 1.6 million people on the bus, not on the road. Think about what we would have in terms of congestion if we did not have Apple Cart. It'd be a lot longer drive through the big intersection by Wendy's. A lot more time to look at the double-decker.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also want to just add that with that idea of East Boone, it may encourage development, right? And I say that to bring up my next question, which is, you and I know that there's contention between the development community and locals. When locals or members of the community don't like a certain development project, they certainly make it known. What do you think is the biggest misconception that residents have about developers?
Ooh, that's a good one. Depends on where you live. I think that a misconception is that a developer can just come in and do something. There are steps. Depending on which municipality you're working with, those steps are very different. I think one thing the town of Boone has done well over the last few years, and the Boone Next Comprehensive Development Plan sets this up to be even better in the future, is opportunity for public input. in a variety of processes. There's, initial conversations, there's public hearings, there's the final vote. For a given project of size and scope, you've got probably 3 or 4 opportunities as a resident to come and weigh in on that. Watauga County's process is different. It's and I don't mean that to say that it's secretive, but you got to know where to find it. It's a little bit more deliberate toward the development versus let's make sure that the world understands. So if you know when planning board meetings are, if you know when board of adjustment meetings are, you can stay informed on that. But those are nuanced things that you got to kind of want it. Mm-hmm. And James is there, so he'll save you a seat. But but that those two cadences are a little bit different. So I think that it's I'll go back to say that even with that, developer still has to go through a process with the county. They have to go through a process a lot of times with the state, depending on what it is they're trying to do. DOT gets involved on occasion. There are points of entry, but what I think also is incumbent upon residents is to stay plugged in. And certainly they rely on organizations like ours and others to kind of be the watchdog, if you will, a little bit. But it's hard to catch everything because sometimes things move fast. There are developers that have good relationships. There are also developers that are pretty smart and understand ordinances and where the loopholes are and what they can get developed in one part of the community versus what they can get developed in another part of the community. And I go back to relationships and leadership. I think that part of our community from a leadership perspective should be that we have an open and honest dialogue with developers to help them find the points of entry and to help them understand what our processes are so they don't feel like they've got to beat around the bush or take the end around to get something done, that we're forward and transparent with the process and we stick to it. I think also residents need to know when they can plug in and how to. Sometimes it is far more effective to have quality conversation rather than to go to a meeting with signs and just go raise hell just because that's what you feel like you're doing. You might be too late. A lot of times you're too late, right, at that point. But I think if we're keeping an eye on what's going on in our communities, we have the opportunity to head some of that stuff off.
And I would just say that one of the things that the two of us are good at is knowing when to have a forward-facing conversation and a non-forward-facing conversation. I believe that, if I'm going to say something, I want everyone to hear it, and I don't mind being on public record, but, there are often times that it's much easier to have an offline conversation that is equally effective, if not more.
I think a great way to set that up. I happen to live in one of the areas that one of these bigger developments is going on out in East Boone, and I found that our county commissioner is very approachable. Doesn't always have the answer that we want, but is approachable to at least understand the process. And part of understanding the process is knowing in that particular development, the county commission has very little say-so into what ultimately comes from that, which is very different than what the town of Boone looks like, where the council has a ton of say, including the final say. So even just educating residents, where a lot of residents might live in the county, work in the town, they feel like there is a boundary confusion, I think, sometimes about A, where a property is, and B, where jurisdictional lines are. Nobody understands except people that are listening to this podcast. So it's kind of like, where do I start? And the number of times I've heard neighbors of mine say, well, I got to call the town about, man, there's a pothole in our road. And it's like, well, first of all, we're not in the town. We're not even close to being in the town. And they don't do that out except like in the town. Oh, I thought they maintained this. No.
Well, and Dalton will be the first one to say, did you know that the town doesn't own or maintain any of its roads? It's, mostly DOT, which is true, but the town still does have some of its roads.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to staying informed. I would encourage people not to just read the headline, to actually dig in a little bit. This is a clickbait society these days. I don't want to, be too much old man standing on my lawn, but I will for a second. You'd be surprised what you find out if you read. and truly dig into an issue rather than look at the Facebook comments or what my boyfriend's sister's brother told me was this. Let's actually cite a source, and then pick up your instrument of choice, whether that is a conversation with a community leader that you feel will give you the time and give you the respect to have that opinion. Sometimes it's those conversations that gets them thinking at a level that then they bring that back to a meeting. And then there are other times where we have seen great evidence in our community of the public coming out to speak for or against a particular item, and the elected bodies that are over those areas, taking that into consideration and sometimes changing their opinion. We're not going to get away, and I say this as a grander thing, we're not going to get away from contentiousness in politics until we take the contentiousness out of it. And that at some point in time means somebody needs to be the bigger person and actually start having conversations again instead of just screaming to scream. That does nobody any good. And in our community, we'll go back to the very beginning of this conversation. What is different than here is that we are a small enough community and relationships are such that I believe that everybody in this community is approachable, from the chancellor to the chair of the county commissioners to the mayor of Boone to any business owner and any resident. Any of us are approachable. And I feel like if you can have a respectful conversation with people, you can at least understand where they're coming from, and you can find an opportunity for a solution. Now, that may be too Sorkin-esque of me, but that's how I roll, and that's what I believe.
I don't think people understand just how important relationships are, both in business and outside of business. Yep. I mean, these are people that you're seeing every day, no matter what. Shifting gears, one of our first episodes, we talked about how the Boone economy is really driven by two things, recreation and tourism. People come to us. As the president and CEO of the chamber, I'm sure you have this pulse on business overall in the community. Are there any industries that are quietly growing in Boone?
Yeah, I think we've got an opportunity to grow what I call our innovation sector, and that is tied to manufacturing in some cases, but small scale research and development, small scale manufacturing, and then maybe beyond that. We do have manufacturing inside the town of Boone. Watauga Opportunities is a hidden gem. They do quite a bit in the medical surge space, as well as some specialty food products that they make. If you have a chocolate Easter bunny, chances are the mold that chocolate was poured in was made at Watauga Opportunities, not the bunny itself. The bunny comes somewhere else. But the chocolate mold, the plastic tray that comes in, was probably formed at Watauga Opportunities. You've got your Charleston Forge, you've got your Goodnight Brothers, some staple things that our community is known for. U.S. Buildings had a larger presence here at some point in time. I think that we have to be realistic in what we recruit and understand that large scale manufacturing is got some disadvantages to coming here. It's not saying that it's impossible, but you have very limited space. You add a lot of cost when you think about transportation, and there are other areas in our region that are better suited for that. But what we have, I'll go back to the university again, we have the innovation advantage. We have intellectual capital. People wonder what we bring to economic development conversations from our area. I think it's brain power. And with that comes the opportunity for things like Rootsy and Pneuma Pharmaceuticals and some of these incredibly innovative industry leaders in terms of taking thoughts and turning those into the next generation of tool that we might need, or the beverage that we may consume. Those things are happening here. And they're happening partly because of Appalachian State, but they're also happening because they're happening. And what I mean is success begets more success. It was incredibly important for us to see GE announce their expansion in Ashe County, $50 million expansion project. GE is incredibly involved in the aerospace industry, and North Carolina is really a leader in that. So between Asheville and Ashe County, that's two prongs of a pipeline of not only jobs, but physical resources and all of the things that go into making jet engines. You don't necessarily think West Jefferson when you think of jet engines, but you should, right? But my point in that is saying that GE saw a region, and it's not just a county, it's a region. They saw a region that was willing of that kind of investment. So if they see that, who else can see that? And how can we make that connection to say GE thinks they can find housing, they think that they can, the space is a thing and they can still get their product in and out. All right, so now as we're talking to Rootsy, let's talk about transportation corridors. Here is somebody that you can map and you can learn from. Here's the route that they have to drive, and it's going to be similar to one that you have to drive. Is there anything that might come as a connection point there? We have the opportunity to attract those types of things. We have to diversify our economy. There's no doubt about that. We've had 2 examples in the last 6 years of what it looks like when tourism stops and the university closes. We don't need to see too many more examples of what it's like when it's just us up here. And I love some us, but we can only do so much in those circumstances. The gift card campaigns and the things that floated businesses for a week or two here or there during COVID or post-Helene cannot be sustained long term when everybody else's economic footprint or imprint is tied to those same 2 things of tourism and throw the university and outdoor recreation all together. So we have to be better. We have to be a little bit stronger in some of those sectors. So it's important for us to look at the connection points that NC Innovation brings in off of the university and how we can grow those businesses right here in our community that are starting in our community and be hospitable toward that. That's where I go back again to relationships, right? How are we listening to what those businesses need and providing what they need? It might be space one time. It might be a piece of work for some time. It might be quality of life the next time. It might be childcare access the next time. We got to listen. We can't just assume that we know everything because we read it in a magazine article about economic development. We have to actually listen. And when we do, I think we can find, going back to, it might look a little different here, but we can find that we can answer most challenges that a business needs to get going. And we've got some really cool stories here too. Baker Forge, an incredible story. There are companies that are in the nooks and crannies and in the hollers that are doing some pretty amazing work. And if we as a community tell that story better, we can attract the next one.
So is there any type of specific industry or business that you or EDC wants to attract to the community?
Yeah. I think that there's going to be an incredible opportunity throughout Western North Carolina, not just here, on the healthcare and life sciences side. When we look at the long-term economic development recovery efforts from Helene, we see, and in working with a group of people focused on this, we see that area, life sciences and healthcare, are going to be the expansion opportunities for us to continue to supply a workforce that's necessary for rural Western North Carolina, but also understand that the rest of the state needs people in these jobs and they need these products. So we are incredibly blessed in this part of the state with a robust community college network of healthcare teaching institutions. So even in our own example, you can go to Watauga High School as a 9th grader, begin taking classes in a healthcare track. You could walk out of Watauga High School with your CNA, with a pathway to Caldwell to finish out your RN, and then take it to App State to get a 4-year degree in nursing, or now a doctorate in nursing. You're off and running with a tremendous career path. That then we hope those students are trying to make an investment here in their home territory, in an area that needs it. On the life sciences development side, that's where I get back to that small scale manufacturing. You look at somebody like Numa, who is a leader in that way, and how can we be supportive of that business, but also attract other business, whether that's within the supply chain or just saying, hey, if these folks are successful, we can figure that out. You've got Baxter Pharmaceutical, less than an hour from here, the global leader in a medical product, right? How can we benefit from their footprint in a region and say, well, you know what the rest of this region can do? Because we've got the right pipelines connecting, at the higher ed level to make sure that people are trained in that regard. It's got to be coordinated, though.
Is that the company that makes the IV bags?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a like in between.
They're in Marion.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And they were in the news during
Yeah, their
Helene.
bridge got washed out.
Yeah.
And DOT went through a Herculean effort to get their bridge put back in so they could get their trucks out to serve the world for IV bags. And they were one of the largest producers, the fastest, if that makes sense, of PPE back during COVID because they had knowledge of a supply line. They had knowledge of what was needed too. And so I go back to Watauga Opportunities. Watauga Opportunities was doing side work for Baxter that would come up here. They would do a thing, send it back down there, and it would go out in the kit or what have you. So one of the things that we've done as a long-term economic recovery group is look at the resources that are available, but also predict a little bit too. If you're going to get all of this big federal investment eventually from the storm, we want to make sure that we're investing those things in areas that also have some foresight to them. So you're rebuilding infrastructure not to what was in the ground the day that Helene hit, but thinking about, all right, if we need this road to be 6 lanes instead of 4 because there's going to be an expanded building in the community college and we need a turn lane in there, that kind of thinking. And it goes beyond that. It goes looking at what rural economies need and knowing that we've got, between, I'm going to leave somebody out here, so forgive me in advance, but between Caldwell, Mayland, Wilkes, Blue Ridge Community College, Isothermal, AB Tech, all within a very tight proximity of one another, you've got some opportunities to streamline some pipelines, but also benefit from all of this workforce training that can lead to job growth in these specific sectors in a really tight area. And I think that's going to lead us to those opportunities to, harness the next thing, whether that's life sciences and healthcare. It could be continued investment in the outdoor manufacturing space. When you get off the mountain, you get into a lot more conversations about traditional manufacturing. You get into places that are served by rail. You get into timber frames and all those types of things that are part of us. I do think there's an opportunity to see a made in Western North Carolina brand come out of all of this conversation, where there is some attention paid to an area that's got a lot of attention, and people may scarf that stuff up because they feel like they're still helping, and they will be if they support the businesses that are behind that kind of thing.
Before we jump real quick to the last part, or one of the last parts, I wanted to have a quick discussion. We talk all the time about what the challenges are: childcare, housing. I don't think that we talk enough about what we are doing right, the relationships, commerce, tourism, recreation. In your mind, what does a healthy economy locally look like?
I think it's affordable.
Okay.
And I think that's also a really hard thing to get your hands around right now. What I feel like, and again, I'll go back to leadership, is that we have to stop talking in absolutes all the time, because absolutes don't exist. There is not an absolute way that all of a sudden we can snap our fingers and there's going to be some program that comes in and all of a sudden makes it to where we can start building $100,000 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses with a view, right? We've got to stop chasing that dream and figure out what it is that we can provide, while also balancing out that, yes, we need housing. Yes, we need childcare. Yes, we need a robust transportation network to move all these people around in a way that's not frustrating. And also services the other transit that goes on in this community. I'll get back to that in a second. But we can lean forward with the connection point. And we can also get a lot better at this. Where usually when there's a project, and I'll take Rootsy for example, that's one where there are a number of people in our community that are trying their best to make that work. Our local elected officials, our economic development officials, people that own space, people that might have a friend that could, that has some ag experience that could be an employee. I mean, we've got that. Hey, we want to help. I think there's a feel for that, like that sense of creativity that comes with helping somebody get settled into a community that we're really good at. The Appalachia culture is a resourceful culture. We do a lot with a little because we have to, right? Now, I don't necessarily think that we have to do it with so much little all the time. We can throw some additional resources in there, but that nurturing culture is still the same. So we can do that better. We can be more attentive. We can listen more than we talk, and we can truly help people, figure out what it is. But we also have to pay attention to that. If you're bringing 20, 30 people. If you bring 10 people to this community right now, childcare is an obstacle, housing is an obstacle. But rather than thinking that we can solve this particular challenge in a way that might have been a resourceful thing 20 years ago, we need to identify what the best thing is for now and begin to educate people about, like, this is as good as it can get currently.
And talking about educating folks on, I didn't tell either one of y'all this, but on Friday I went to town council to just give them some input, as I usually do. And so the town is currently working on setting their budget for the year. And one of the ways that the town generates revenue is through property taxes. Long story short, I made it very clear that wages are not keeping up with inflation. I think that is the part where there's a lot of economic pain right now, is because people aren't getting paid at a rate where things around them are increasing.
Yeah. Well, and the tourism industry is going to always be what it is. It's I would love to see every member of the wait staff, a member of the kitchen staff get paid a living wage in this community tomorrow. The economics of that would mean that your hamburger would cost about $40, right? That is maybe not necessarily a job sector where that expectation ultimately is as realistic as it would be job creation in other areas that can sustain that living wage, and giving people more options. I think sometimes that you hear people driven to those career pathways because they may be some of the only ones that exist here. And it may not be that people can be so selective and just say, well, if I can't find the job that I want here, I'm going to go move somewhere else. We all know that there are numerous ties that keep people in an area, but where job diversification can come from, we're getting involved in some of these, R&D and advanced manufacturing kind of operations, is that generally those jobs come with higher wages, and you can get more earning where people can keep pace with inflation. But I know that my daughter works part-time at a local retail store. She's not going to be able to buy a house and a car and afford life off that part-time job, right? And that we rely so much on those positions to make the tourism economy piece work. Do we need to figure this out? Sure, of course. I think there is a difficulty in aligning sometimes the wages that we feel are necessary with the business model of those businesses. Take it back to childcare for a second. You're looking at feeling good, knock on whatever, about like a $15 an hour salary, if anybody's making that in that industry right now. That is wholly unfair. These are the folks that are working with our youngest learners at the most critical time for their learning, and we're paying them less than some of those retail jobs are. Yet the business cannot afford to pay them more. Otherwise, that is a pass-through to the parent that makes that now too unaffordable for them to need. So that pulls people out of our workforce. It's not always as simple as just saying, we'll pay them more. I don't think that, go back to education, I think that there needs to be more education about what the margins look like for business up here, period. It costs more to do things here. So, I think that there is this goes to developers a little bit too. And while some of them actually do behave this way, that give the rest of them a bad rap, there's this Scrooge McDuck mentality that everybody that owns a business is just sitting there in the back counting money, where very rarely is that the case, especially with small family-owned businesses. You find that they're actually pouring money into it. They're pouring their own personal savings into businesses. There's a childcare business up here where the principal of the childcare business does not take a salary from the business and works 2 side jobs just to keep the business floating. And that is commonplace. So yeah, adjusting wages is paramount. but we also have to be realistic with what that means without some other larger intervention. And the state of North Carolina has said specifically as it relates to Helene, money's not coming from the state. You're not going to get tax relief. You're not going to get a grant. You're going to get a low interest loan. You're going to get the opportunity to pay that cash back, but that's not what anybody needs to hear right now either. So we're in a tight spot, and we're in a tight spot economically right now. With the costs going up the way they have and at the rate they have, you're looking at some anecdotal research that we did last week. You got people between 6 and 20% down over last year, and we'll remember that last year at this time, early spring or early summer, late spring, we weren't in a great situation then. So you're 6 to 20% down on that. Yet, yeah, you're right. I'd love to go and pay people more, but where's the money? Where is it? Can we do things in our community to make it less burdensome for everybody? Yes. And that, I think, is a focus and something I'm sure that you talk to them about regularly.
Just to close the loop on all this, I would be remiss if I didn't say that one of the reasons that I think that we have such a strong small business community, such a strong sense of entrepreneurship, is because of the way that our economy is built, that we don't have huge employers that are employing folks, and that people are very gritty within our community.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to even more so why it's so important to support those people when we do have the opportunity to do it. When you think about the, Takeout Tuesday back during COVID, or the comeback shack nights, when not only are you supporting a local business that's owned and operated here, that business is also dumping thousands of dollars into the school lunch debt for Watauga County schools, with some of those comeback shack nights that they do. Those are the stories. Those are your neighbors. Your kids play ball together. You go to church together. You see each other on the greenway. Those are the businesses that you want to support. And we don't have a lot of that large chain presence here. And you look at even like the High Country independent restaurants getting back together. That's all of those people that you would think, again, are competitors, are talking together to think about ways that they can bring the entire industry up. And that does support wage growth. That supports special circumstances like small plate crawls and the downtown business kind of restaurant week that they just did not long ago. Those things are all supported by people that want better for everybody, not just themselves. And I think that's part of this too, is that you have very few, but we have very few people who are in it for just themselves. Most people are in it for the growth of the community, and those are the people that we get fired up to support.
One of the last things before we get to the really fun part today that I wanted to talk to you about that I don't think that we do enough of is this visioning, right? Looking forward. Yes, we have the Boone Next Comprehensive Plan. That is a very forward-thinking visioning document, but in terms of business and just the community as a whole, what do you hope Boone looks like 10 years from now?
Yeah, this is a great question. I had to stew on this one a little bit. I think that we have to be honest in this. I think 10 years from now, you're going to look at less of a student population here. I think you're going to look at a place that still can serve the purpose for so many, and that is an escape. Can we continue to invest in things that make that a reality? So that means, investment in our Main Street communities, making sure that downtown Boone, downtown Blowing Rock, Lansing, Banner Elk, Newland are attractive to people who are just looking for a step back. Are we supporting the kinds of businesses that will ultimately service that need? Right now we're in the brewery craze. What does that craze look like 10 years from now? Who knows? Maybe it's sweet potato milk. Do we have the best sweet potato milk bars that money can buy? But are we paying attention to trends? Are we creating that escape? But are we diversifying our economy in a way that is less reliant on the transactional student relationship and more reliant on taking what is coming out of the university and operationalizing that. So I will remain, and our organization will remain, an amazing supporter of NC Innovation. I know that that is a political football right now, but the way that they are able to help transform projects out of the classroom and into brick and mortar opportunities that benefits our community, especially if we can get really good at hosting those. And that is where our wage growth comes from. That's where our, I think we've got a couple of postcard versions of this community. Well, we've got one prevailing postcard version, and that's the tourism. Everybody's happy, Tweetsie Railroad, Grandfather Mountain, a picnic lunch on the Parkway. That's life, right? You don't go very far down the road to see a different version of that story, and that is one of the poorest counties in the area, one that has got compromised infrastructure still from the hurricane and needed work there. How are we working to create opportunities for those families and those businesses to bounce back, using the investments that we're getting from the federal government now in recovery and using those to our advantage? So what I hope you see 10 years from now is a community that looks largely like it does now. Maybe we can move around a little faster or a little bit more conveniently. Maybe we have some expanded public transit capacity. What I hope you don't see is just row after row after row after row of student housing on the way into town. I think that depletes the energy that you get when you come here. What I hope you see is a coordinated community, one that is still working together and that has strategic plan alignment amongst the three large entities in the community, and that means that we're hosting with intentionality. But then when you get here, you can still do what you need to do, and you're going to find some different kinds of businesses. You're going to find more innovation and intellectual capital being used to our advantage, but you're still going to find the creaky steps at the mass store, and you're going to still find. I hope you will find a more educated workforce, one that's going to benefit from some of the infusion that things like Propel NC can do if the General Assembly passes that, and the credential attainment that we've all been going after. I hope that you'll see evidence of those things working to where you see that this community is sustainable. But its mix is going to change. And if you don't believe us, just look at the birth rate. We are not replacing the population at the same way it's coming in. So we know that's going to hit higher ed. It's going to hit all over the place. It's going to hit our population before too long. We have an aging population that we are going to need to take care of. How does our healthcare evolve with that? I think these are all challenges we can solve. But to your point, and to what we've discussed overarching here, that's going to take leadership and relationships as much as anything, to be able to sit down and not sugarcoat it, but also speak pragmatically about what it is that we need to do as a community to still be that place, that little beacon on the hill that people want to come to and bring their families to. And you're talking about 10 years from now is another generation of exposure to that. What are they seeing? Hopefully Thomas the Train is still pulling up at Tweetsie and bringing a couple thousand people with him when he pulls in, no matter how mad Sir Topham Hatt might get. But we know that those things are important for us.
In closing, and I want to throw out some caveats here. When I say Boone, I'm not specifically saying Town of Boone as a government or Town of Boone, more just Boone in the sense of community. What conversations are we as a community avoiding right now?
Anything that ruffles political feathers. And I don't mean that to be rude. I mean that to be real.
Yeah.
Right now that we know that our community is incredibly reliant on the North Carolina General Assembly. We have a high concentration of state employees here. We have a high concentration of government entities in this community. School system, App State, county government, you name it, right? So you can't just go rocking the boat. One of the single greatest things that we could have for our community is a budget, because that budget's going to include a state employee raise. And when you have 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 employees that work for the state of North Carolina, that live in a community, that get a raise, that's an economic boost for the community because they're spending that money here. That's groceries, that's gas, that's local lion, that's whatever. They're spending that money here. So let's get that done first, right? But I think that we avoid conversations that without good stewards involved with them, they run the risk of damaging the integrity of our community. I think we balk at transportation communities because down at the core, you never hear anybody say, man, I wish we had this road widened. It's always, let's take it back to 2 lanes. I remember when King Street used to be a gravel road. Cool. Not now. That's not the reality of now. So we tend to think about improvement as something that is contrary to what we can do. That's why I always say, we can do these things. We can modernize with also maintaining the integrity of what it is we know and love here. We know that 421 is never going to be 4 lanes going through the town of Boone. It cannot physically, unless you tore the town down, and nobody's going to do that. So that's always going to be this little charming little section of a U.S. highway. Drive on 421 anywhere else in that corridor, and you until you get to Mountain City, I guess, it doesn't look that way, right? So we are foregoing that. We know that that's not a thing. But what can we concentrate on that can move people around? We don't pay enough attention to the fact that a lot of the people that are in this community are not coming to this community. That if you're trying to go from Hickory to Banner Elk, unless you want to take the spaghetti string that is 221 between Blowing Rock and there, you are coming through Boone to do it. People argue about traffic, and all the people that are, some of them aren't even trying to be here. They're going somewhere else. We don't pay enough attention to that piece of the traffic conundrum. So,
but that visitor that is just coming through per se has an economic impact.
They do.
And that's what people in our community need to realize.
Yeah, and they also they have an economic impact, and they may not have an economic impact if you just send them as far out of the way as possible. Right. And they'll now business tends to find where people are. So if you send people as far away out as possible, what kind of corridor development are you inadvertently committing yourself to? So those are, but we don't need to shy away from the conversation. We just don't need to say, screw it. That's too complicated. I think we can have hard conversations here. I think we got a lot of smart people who have been here for a long time and see what works and what doesn't. And we need to listen to them. I think the locals' voice needs to be louder, but not loud. You know what I mean? There's a difference there. It needs to be in the room, in the conversation, but informed, and not just a voice that's throwing out, this is how it used to be. Give us some true understanding of what you've seen, what's developed over generations here, and what do you think could be the solution that we're looking for, versus waiting to Monday morning quarterback it on Facebook. That does nobody any good.
Where I think that folks in the community could improve is this notion that we see a lot of people come out when it's either NIMBY, not in my backyard, or there's a traumatic event. 50 people want to come to a town council meeting and talk. But where are you all those other times?
Yeah.
It's okay to bring that perspective to local government.
Sure. And I think that without getting too deep down this road, I think that it's incumbent upon government to become trustworthy.
Yeah.
Not saying that they're not. I think government as a whole, geopolitically, is not. And there are a million studies that back that up. But again, all politics are local, right? If you are a local elected official, the best thing that you can do for this community right now is to be transparent and to be truthful. We have seen a pretty good diet of that. We've seen some others that have not been so much, or put their personal interest right in the middle of every conversation, and that's elections matter, right? Pay attention, be informed about who's running, but then also to those that are in those leadership positions. Your goal is to represent everybody, not just the people in your district, but it's to represent the entire community and the community's interests. I like the harmony that we have currently between boards. We know that there'll be some shakeup in that in the fall based on the election calendar, but I hope the harmony continues. And there are a mix on both boards, as a matter of fact, of some people that have been here for a really long time, some people that are native to the community, the Tim Hodges of the world on the county commission. Tim's been here since Daniel Boone. but those are important voices. It can't just be one thing. It can't just be a pro-development or an anti-development or a, whatever. It's got to be a mix of things because we are a mixed community of a variety of influences, and it's going to take us all listening to one another. I think that's we don't listen enough. Everybody talks, man, but you can gain so much understanding and perspective, even if you're on the other side of the argument. If you actually listen to what the argument is, you might actually find that there is more common ground than you think. Mm-hmm. Instead of just saying, well, if you are, red and I'm blue or vice versa, that we're just going to be immediately opposed to everything. That's not true. Not here. Mm-hmm. I see so much evidence to the contrary, that so much of those values and alignment are just about here, about who we are and what we want to be. And yeah, you get into some other stuff on occasion, but for the most part, people want a safe community. They want their kids to be able to go to good schools and learn and be productive. They want to be able to have an affordable place to live. They want their children to be well cared for, and they want to be prosperous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's not a partisan issue. So let's stop making everything like that and actually listen to one another and get something done.
Wow, I have a clock in front of me, and we've been at it for a while, but as we wrap up, one of the things that Jamie and I thought would be fun and was, since we had you here, give you kind of a lightning round of questions.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, and she's going to...
Do I have a word limit on the answers?
I'm not going to give you a word limit. I'm just going to say short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
But thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I just want to say as someone who does not swirl in all of these things that the two of you do, I learned a lot. And I think I loved what you said just about relationships and listening to each other. I think you're right. We get in our own echo chambers and we don't listen. And I think staying curious, and for locals just like me, I think having that education and learning, like I had no idea how the apple cart was funded. And so that's so interesting just to know it's not as simple as just being like, we need another line or whatever. And asking good questions. I think building those relationships and understanding kind of the whys behind some of these decisions is a great thing. So anyway, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. One Boone business everyone should support this summer.
I'm going to immediately violate the terms on this and say anybody on Howard Street.
Okay, great. Most underrated area of Boone.
Valley Cruces Park.
Okay. One development trend you're bullish on.
All of them. just to watch his reaction. No. What am I bullish on? Student housing.
Okay. One trend you wish would slow down.
Student housing.
What's one thing outsiders misunderstand about Boone?
That this is the same community that your grandparents came to.
Good. Okay. One building in the town of Boone with the most potential.
Man, that's a good one. Building in town with the most potential. I'm going to say the building that Northgate is working on, just outside of the Boone town limits going toward Tennessee on the left-hand side.
I sold him that building.
Of course you did. Of course you did. I didn't know that immediately, but of course you did. But yeah, that area, I think and I'll expand it out a little bit and say the gateways to the communities, whether it's that area, whether it's the area over by 105 extension and bypass. I think that each gateway has got a project right now that could kind of define that. I was talking a little earlier about the entranceway to Boone and how it sets the vibe. You could have some really cool tone setting that speaks again to our community and what we're about and what we prioritize by just developing those corridors appropriately.
But in the same token, protecting the view shed.
Yes, yeah,
and,
exactly.
We can't just
we're not trying to put like the Kings Mountain Casino in the middle of all of that. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
David, thank you so much for coming, being our first guest, for being not only a friend but a champion. That's kind of the best word that I can think of when I think of David Jackson is you have all these accolades. You've done a lot of things within our community, but by far you are one of our greatest champions. And
Well, I appreciate
grateful
that.
for you.
A lot of people are similar, and the more we continue to talk and learn from one another, the better we'll all be. So thank you for providing the tea. This is a great vehicle, and I hope that it will just get people thinking. Another opportunity to get some good information to think about the things that we see around us every day. So thank you all as well.
All right. Well, we'll wrap things up today. Jamie, appreciate you.
Yeah.
I will see you in a couple of weeks.